Layne Norton, Dr. Layne Norton, thank you so much for coming on. And like we said off camera, we have so much in common, from the competing in bodybuilding to the powerlifting to the calling out people's bullshit. And just in general, I just love your message. I love your brain. And I love how you describe yourself too. A BS expert in nutrition, health, and fitness, a science geek that likes to lift heavy shit, because I'm always telling women to LHS, lift heavy shit. And I just want you to know before we get started, yeah, I'm going to bring up some things that I really want to kind of pick your brain on, that I agree with you on, that I don't agree with you on, but I want your brain working and telling me the why, because I really want to kind of pick through it. I think you know where I'm going with the insulin. But when I listen to you on Huberman, I feel like you held back. People listening to this need to go and they need to listen to your What the Fitness Talks on YouTube or on your website, because that is the real you. So I want you unfiltered, just let it all go. Does that sound like a deal?
Sounds like a deal. I heard curse words, so I'll let it go.
Just let it go. Just you be you. That's what I want. You be you. So honestly, Layne, I mean, you're just so well schooled, and I love how you go through studies and really pick them apart. And honestly, most everything you say, I agree with you on. Ironically, recently I did a podcast on calories in, calories out, and I think that that's so important to dive into, especially for my listeners, because I tend to focus on thyroid and hormones, and I'm driving home the point that if your thyroid's not optimized, you're not really going to have a metabolism. It doesn't matter how low your calories go or what diet you do. But then we get away from the counting of calories and the importance of energy in and energy out. So can you expand on just all the myths and the false beliefs that we have in this space that we're in, where people get so locked down, they kind of forget about basic energy expenditure?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to point out would be, with regards to the audience here is, calories and energy balance don't exist in isolation of hormones or thyroid, for example. They're all interconnected. So, for example, the reason people who with thyroid problems have difficulty losing weight is if you're low thyroid, it will drop your basal metabolic rate. So, for example, I think the literature, the largest drop I've observed is a 25% drop in BMR. So, for example, if somebody would normally have, say, a 2000 BMR is pretty high, but let's say 1500 BMR, that might drop it by like over 200 calories per day. So it significantly impacts their total calorie burn for the day. And beyond that, people with thyroid issues, so that's just your basal metabolic rate, which is only one aspect of daily energy expenditure. You also have your physical activity, which consists of exercise, which everyone understands that. And I think most people, when they think of physical activity, just think of exercise, but actually the bigger portion of physical activity is your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically your unconscious movements throughout the day. So fidgeting, pacing, just things that you're not cognizant of. That actually typically for most of us makes up a bigger portion of our energy expenditure per day. And if your thyroid is low, you're not going to feel as good, and it's very likely that you're actually going to make less subconscious movements throughout the day. And so while you may go exercise and do the same exercise you usually do, you're more likely not going to do a lot of unconscious movement, or you're going to, because you don't feel as good.
Right.
So I think the point being like, well, and there's research to show that NEAT, that subconscious movement, is modifiable up to like 500 calories a day. So I think I saw a study where like a 10% reduction in body weight led to a like 400 to 500 calorie drop in NEAT per day. So you combine, like say, 400 or 500 calories plus 200 or 300 calorie reduction from BMR. I mean, now you're up to, a 500 to 700 per day reduction in total energy expenditure, possibly, due to some of these things. So I think people think they hear calories in versus calories out, and they go, oh, well, I tracked my calories and I didn't lose weight. Well, that's like saying I kept a budget and didn't save money.
Right.
you can keep a budget and still not save money. You can also save money without keeping a budget, but a budget can be a great tool for saving money. But I don't think anybody would argue that in order to save money, you need to earn more than you spend. And by the same token, if you did not lose weight during a period of time, like I say, I'm very careful with how I word this because people tend to weigh in sporadically, which is another big miss that people make, because people like don't trust the process, and so they do something for a week or two and like, oh, it's not working. When in reality, they like waited one day in the morning, one day in the afternoon, and didn't standardize anything. And like, oh, look, I gained a half a pound. While if they would have waited every single day in the morning after urinating, their average would have dropped like 2 pounds. But since they weighed sporadically, it said they gained half a pound. They go, oh, see, I didn't lose weight. Calories in, calories out doesn't work. Again, that's like saying gravity doesn't work. That's like saying, well, there's planes, so gravity doesn't work. No, gravity still works. So the point being is, if you didn't lose weight, like I talk about an average, so over several weeks on average, then you weren't in a calorie deficit. Now, you may have been what you thought was a calorie deficit or what should have been a calorie deficit, but if you didn't lose weight, it was not a calorie deficit. So I think that's the point to make. And I think a lot of people attach judgment to that, and that's why there's so much pushback against it. They're saying, well, you're saying I'm lazy, or you're saying I'm a glutton. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, that's like saying, well, if you don't save money, you must just be, popping bottles at the club. No, not necessarily. And I do think, the problem is I'm talking about on a granular level, the mechanistic aspect of weight gain or loss, which is energy balance or calorie balance. But just telling people to eat less, move more is not really necessarily a helpful message. It's true, it is true, but that's like telling somebody, well, if you want to save money, just earn more than you spend. There, you have that information, so go do it. Like it's there's a reason that, I think it's something like 70 or 80% of Americans can't write a check for $5,000 if they had to. So much like energy, people on average underreport their calorie intake by 30 to 50%. People also underreport their debt by about 100 to 150%. So, there's a lot. I use financial examples a lot because I feel like they're it's a little bit more intuitive for people. Mm-hmm. So, these things, there's a lot of parallels between these things. So anyways, the point being, if you want to lose weight, you have to be in a calorie deficit. However, how you get to that calorie deficit is by modifying your habits and behaviors typically.
Yeah. So so many things that you said that I want to expand on. So with the NEAT, I saw a study, and this was even before you were on Huberman. I saw that study come out about the soleus movement, and you're going to know more details about it than I do, but just the people that spontaneously, without thinking about it, do that tapping of the foot, that, you're sitting at your desk, and I'm doing it now just because I'm thinking about it, moving my heel up and down and contracting the soleus muscle. But part of that study, now I can't remember whether they said it in it or this was discussed afterwards, that you can't consciously produce NEAT. You can't think like, I am going to sit here and tap my foot to burn more calories. It has to be just a part of you, who you are, spontaneous. Is that right?
Yeah, so it may seem a little bit pedantic in terms of the definition, but it is important because people say, well, I'm going to go out for a walk and get my NEAT up. No, if you're consciously doing it, it is exercise. It is not NEAT. NEAT is unconscious. So people will kind of dismiss NEAT, and say, well, it's physical activity, that whatever. They get hung up on my metabolism, my metabolic rate, which actually, if you look at the data on metabolic rate, when we first started examining obesity, we thought, oh, well, people who are obese will have a slow metabolism. And then we started looking at, and if anything, people who are obese on average have a faster metabolism than people who are lean. Right. Now, once you standardize for their lean body mass, it ends up being basically the same as lean people. So per kilogram of lean body mass, it's very similar. But they don't have a slow metabolism, on average at least. What tends to be much bigger regulator is physical activity. NEAT, like you said. And once again, they have shown that people who tend to be obese resistant, the obese resistant phenotype, tend to just spontaneously increase their movement without realizing it if they overeat. So you may have seen some of these people who, like, when they eat a heavy meal, they get like sweaty and they start fidgeting, and like that's a real thing. In fact, there was a study back in 1995, I think it was 1995, by, I want to say, Levine, and they overfed people by, I think, 1,000 calories per day over like an 8-week period, I want to say. And I think the average weight gain was something like 5 kilograms or something like that. I could be butchering it a little bit, but it's something around that ballpark. And it went as high as like 8 kilograms. And there was one person who only gained 0.8 kilograms. So it was this huge spread. And what they found is the person who only gained 0.8 kilograms basically just started compensating by spontaneously moving more. They didn't realize they were doing it. And so people who are obese resistant tend to compensate for increases in energy intake by just becoming spontaneously more active. Whereas people who are obese prone tend to not increase their spontaneous activity even when they overfeed. So, I think a lot of people will hear that and they still get hung up on the word physical activity and they think exercise. It's not exercise. If you are consciously doing it, it is not NEAT. Okay. So if you say, I'm going to go out for a walk, or I'm going to take the stairs instead of the escalator, hey, it's great. It's contributing to your physical activity, but it does not fall into the category of NEAT. NEAT is not modifiable consciously.
It's just who you are as a person. Do you fidget?
Yeah.
Do you not fidget? Are you one of those guys that
Yeah.
sweat? And we've all seen that, like the bodybuilders, right? Back in the day, whoo, they're eating their chicken and the broccoli and their rice, and they're sweating up a storm.
Yeah.
Now, kind of going back to that, right? When you and I were competing, and you probably, I've heard you talk about eating clean, so I'm going to use that term very sparingly, but I know that you control what you eat. And I dove into the Carbon app, which I love, and I've been recommending it to many, many, many of my patients and listeners because it's just so streamlined. Like, I hate my Fitness Pal. I hate those tracking apps. I've stayed away from them until I stumbled upon your Carbon app. And I was like, this is really cool shit, because you have in there already loaded things that I eat, like the Siete almond flour tortilla shells. You have Designs for Health, whole body collagen in there. I'm like, boom, done. But with that app, how do you determine? So let's say my patients are using it and we want them obviously to lose weight. I'm working on their thyroid and hormones, but we really have to dial in their calories. How do you determine what the target caloric set point is, including the deficit, in order to get that person to lose weight, and account for what if they have a lower BMR because their thyroid's all jacked up?
So I'll have to speak generally because it's a proprietary algorithm that I helped write.
Right.
But essentially, the first step is the app is going to try and estimate your total daily energy expenditure. Now, we have a pretty accurate calculation, but it's just a calculation. There are people who will fall outside that, no question, which is why the real benefit of the app is being consistent with it and checking in each week, logging your food, and then logging your body weight daily. Because if you aren't losing the amount of weight the app predicts that you should, the app is going to sense that and make adjustments to your nutrition recommendations as you go along in order to get you in line with that. So, a lot of people, when it first came out, they said, well, I did it and these calories are too high for me. And I'm like, my first response, or they're too low for me. And my first response would be, well, if you already knew what to eat, why are you using the app? So it's like, and I've had this with coaching. Wow, this is wrong. Okay, well then why did you hire me? Like, if you're just going to tell me it's wrong, if you already know better than me, then don't hire me. But beyond that, the real value in the app is the fact that it will adjust based on how you progress. So the first thing it's going to try and do is determine your total daily energy expenditure. Once it has that calculated, then it's going to look at, in terms of weight loss, what rate of loss have you selected? So basically, during the sign-up process, it's going to give you a range that you can choose of weight to lose, and that is based off a percentage of your total body weight. So a lot of people will say, well, why can't I select more than, 1.7 pounds per week or something like that? Well, it's based off of your total body weight. Like if you're a heavier person, you're going to be able to select a higher rate of weight loss. But if you're a lighter person, you're not going to be able to select as much weight loss because it's going to increase your risk of lean mass loss. And we know how detrimental that is for keeping weight off, preventing it from coming back on, and your BMR. So we're going to really try and maintain that lean mass. And obviously, so once we have total daily energy expenditure, or at least our estimation of it, and then we have the rate of loss, that gives us an idea of, okay, well, if we're trying to lose this much per week, that corresponds to about, a certain calorie deficit. So then we take that calorie deficit, subtract it from the total daily energy expenditure, and that's how we get, kind of the calorie amount.
Okay. And it's eye-opening too. I mean, I love that you have that all built in to the algorithm. And the one thing that I recognized when I tried it before I recommended it to my patients is it is eye-opening when you truly log everything that goes into your mouth and you're using an app that is so smart to really pick up on. It's not just you going to Google and saying, well, I think a chicken breast is, 100 and some calorie or whatever. You already have that preloaded in there. And wow, I thought that I was eating X amount of calories, but I'm really eating this much. I thought I was taking in this much protein, but it's lower than what I thought. And that's the biggest thing, I think, because so many people, like you said, they'll get frustrated and they'll hit that end of the week or first 2 weeks and say, well, I'm doing everything right. I should be seeing more progress. But when you look at it right in front of you and you're faced with that hard truth, maybe you're not. Like maybe you are taking in way more than you even think in your head.
Yeah, I've had so many of those messages, that's in line with the scientific information. If we look at research data, it depends on the demographic, but most people underestimate their caloric intake by about 30 to 50%. Obese women tend to underestimate the most in terms of demographics. They're like 50 to 70% underestimation. Obese men are like, I think it's like 40 to 60%. And then like your average person is like around 30, 40%. A lean person tends to only underreport by like 20%, but even dietitians underreport by like 10%. So, that is a very, very normal thing. And I think people really hate to hear that data because they go, well, I'm not a liar. I'm not saying you're lying. I don't think most people are lying about it. I think we look at things through rose-colored glasses. I think most people have a really, really poor idea of portion sizes. Yep. If you want to be depressed, go weigh out a serving of ice cream. Go weigh out a serving of peanut butter. Go weigh out a serving of cereal. And even if you're using volume measurements, well, I measure, I do, I weigh out, 3/4 cup of cereal. Go weigh it. I promise you it weighs more than the serving size. Right. You do 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, I promise you're eating double of what the serving size is. And so it's very, very easy to overestimate. So, I don't expect people to like use a scale for the rest of their life. That's for most people, it's not a sustainable lifestyle. But I will say weighing and tracking every single thing you put in your mouth for a few weeks is a really useful experiment, just like, monitoring all your expenses for a month is very useful to see where your money is going. And it's very eye-opening. And I'll tell you, I did a PhD in nutrition. The most I ever learned about nutrition was the first week I ever tracked everything when I was 19 years old back in 2001. And I really don't want to hear about how hard it is from people because all I had back then was a book, the complete book of food counts about that thick. And I would have to flip to the page that the food was on, find it, look at the serving size, then look at how much I ate, divide by the serving size, multiply the macros by that, and then do the calculation by hand. So I just don't really want to hear how difficult it is when you can just go to our app, scan the food label, punch in how many grams you had, and it's done.
Yeah, no, I love the app. I've reached out to you guys about mass buying, memberships and subscriptions because I want my people doing this. That way they can't come back and say, and granted, some do need a bump up in their T3 or an increase in their testosterone or whatever. But I think too many times they go right to that. Like, I'm not losing weight, so therefore increase my thyroid medication. It's like, well, what are you actually taking in? So let's get that down pat. And then if you're telling me per that app that you should be losing and you're not, then let's do some labs and really look deeper and see if a med change is needed. So I love that. I was going to bring it up at the end, but I brought it up now because it really is eye-opening, and it pertains to our calorie talk, because you're going to get it right there in your face, right there. Yeah.
Yep. And, I think I've had so many people say, oh, well, I can recall one gal actually in particular. She's like, I'm eating 1,600 calories a day. I'm not losing weight. And she was doing volume measurements. I said, do me a favor, just weigh for 1 week, weigh every single thing that you put in your mouth. And it didn't even take a week. Like 2 days later, she came back. She's like, oh my God, I'm eating 2,700 calories a day. I said, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And she was tracking, she was just using volume measurements, and just her switching to weighing it, she realized that she was drastically underestimating her caloric intake.
I'll say that's huge. That's huge. Okay. We're going to move on to the debate portion now. Okay. Insulin. Layne, I see so many people that are insulin resistant. And I have PCOS, I guess have had, I don't know, I'm kind of over it now, but I'm not insulin resistant anymore. But I know what that's like to be insulin resistant and be like, I can't lose weight no matter what I do, even if I am tracking. And when I eat a carbohydrate, it's like I've gained 10 pounds. If I look sideways at a brownie, it's like I gained 10 pounds. So can we get into the insulin component?
Well, so if we look at the research data, there's one meta-analysis that assessed, insulin resistant versus non-insulin resistant. Is there a difference in weight loss? When they put them under the same caloric restriction, they did not see a difference. So, now I'm not holding out the idea that there could be individual differences. Now, what you tend to see is people, and I don't know if you were weighing and tracking precisely at the time or anything like that, but people, so type 2 diabetics or people who are insulin resistant or people with PCOS, they have shown that they're more likely to underreport their caloric intake. And again, not saying that they're lying or anything like that, but just people are very poor estimators of portion size. When it comes to PCOS, there was one study that showed a reduction in BMR with people who have PCOS, but there was about a half dozen studies after that that did not replicate that. They showed that there was actually no difference. So right now, the way the data suggests that insulin resistance doesn't seem to negatively affect weight loss efforts. And if you think about mechanistically, so if you're insulin resistant or low insulin sensitivity, you're insulin resistant in muscle tissue, but you're also insulin resistant in fat tissue as well. So that's one of the reasons that blood glucose goes up, is because you have difficulty putting it into fat cells. In fact, they show lean people, their adipose tissue is actually more insulin sensitive. So if you think about adipose tissue, it's kind of like you have these fat cells, and typically the way you lose or gain body fat is those cells expand or shrink. The bigger they get, the more resistant they get to insulin. But it means that basically you have glucose that starts to spill over in the bloodstream, as well as free fatty acids. But that's because they just can't put any more into adipose. So actually this is going to sound crazy, one of the treatments for type 2 diabetes is sulfonylureas, which basically are PPAR gamma agonists, which their mechanism is they create more fat cells. So now you have more small adipocytes to put glucose and free fatty acids into, and it has the effect of dropping your blood glucose and your free fatty acids, but now you have more fat mass. So if you're insulin sensitive, you're also insulin sensitive in fat cells. So in reality, if somebody is insulin resistant, if anything, they should typically have an easier time losing weight mechanistically, only from the perspective that it's just hard to put anything more into the adipocyte. But again, I can hold out, when we talk about studies, we report averages. I recognize that not everybody's the same, but I will say that, when people will use terminology like everybody's different. Well, if you look at our genetics, we're like 99.9% identical if you're a human. So, is it possible? Yes, there are genetic polymorphisms on genes. There are people with low BMRs. There are, genetic abnormalities. But for the most part, if you look at the averages, it doesn't tend to be different. If you put people on the same level of caloric restriction, whether they're insulin resistant or not, they tend to lose about the same amount of weight.
Well, so you have a type 2 diabetic, and we know we'll go one step further. We'll go into type 2 diabetes, not just insulin resistance. And we know that their pancreas, because they've been eating like garbage for so long, and there's probably a genetic component as well, their pancreas is pumping out more insulin than what is actually necessary to take care of the blood glucose spike. So now you have excess insulin, and I've heard you say before, it is the fat storage hormone. We know insulin is a storage hormone. So with that excess insulin, isn't that why we see that cycle happen with type 2 diabetes, where they will pump out excess insulin, get fatter, become more insulin resistant?
Remember why it's pumping out excess insulin. It's because the fat cells are not as insulin sensitive. So in order to get the same effect of fat storage in adipose, you actually need more insulin. So it's not like, okay, you have more insulin, so it's causing more fat storage. It's you need more insulin to cause the same amount of fat storage. So remember, it can always be the reverse causality, which it is in this case. And if we look at the studies, like if that were true, if insulin was the culprit for obesity, then semaglutide could not function the way it does. So semaglutide, for those who aren't familiar, all these new anti-obesity treatments that seem to be extremely effective. On average, people lose about 15 to 17% of their body weight when they take these. In the short term, it raises meal insulin secretion pretty substantially, actually. So these drugs are GLP-1 mimetics, and GLP-1 has the effect of raising insulin. Now, in the kind of pushback on that mostly from the low carb community has been, well, look at their long-term levels of insulin, they actually drop. Well, their long-term, their basal levels of insulin drop because they're losing weight. So over the long period of time, they lose weight, they become more insulin sensitive. But in the short term, it raises insulin. So I think a lot of people get really hung up on insulin, and insulin is more of a passive player in this game. And if you look at, like, let's take two extreme diets, like low carb, high fat, and low fat, high carb, right? Low fat, high carb, you got a lot of insulin available, or more insulin than low carb, high fat. But one thing people don't realize, so if you do a low carb diet, you will burn a lot of fat, okay? Your fat burning will go up. But people equate fat burning with the loss of body fat, and they're actually two different things. Fat burning is one part of the loss of body fat equation. The other part is the amount of fat you store. Much like the net deposition of protein, your net protein balance is the balance between synthesis and degradation. The net deposition of or loss of body fat is the balance between fat storage and fat burning or fat oxidation. Most people focus on the fat oxidation portion, but here's why the fat storage is important. We don't really tend to store dietary carbohydrate as fat. There was a study back in the early 2000s where they did a metabolic tracer, which is basically they can essentially tag nutrients, for lack of a better term, and see where they wind up. And they found that so they overfed, I think it was women, by like 1,000 calories per day. And they found that they stored, I think it was something like 272 grams of fat per day on average during this overfeeding study in adipose. Of that body fat, 4 grams originated as dietary carbohydrate. So your body doesn't really store dietary carbohydrate as fat, it stores dietary fat as fat. Now, if you eat high carb, you raise insulin, which can drive fat into fat cells.
Right.
But if you're eating high carb, low fat, you don't have much fat available. So if you eat high carb, low fat, you have low amounts of fat burning, but you also have low amounts of fat storage. If you eat Low carb, high fat, you have high amounts of fat burning, but you also have high amounts of fat storage. The net effect of losing or gaining body fat will depend on energy balance. So that in that aspect, insulin is much more of a passive player than a lot of people think.
Okay. So one thing I do agree with you on, and I've heard you talk about this, I'm tying this into the insulin talk, and what you said about low carb dieting is I see a lot of people jump on the, we'll say keto because that's the word, the keto bandwagon and go really low carb, really high fat. And that is usually where I will see the weight gain. That's where the mostly women will come to me and say, I did keto and I gained weight. And so we know that that is excess calories in the form of fat because they way overdid the fat. They're doing their bulletproof coffee and they're chugging, lard basically all throughout the day, eating bacon and pork rinds. So I completely agree with you there because I've seen it. I've done it to myself as an experiment, just adding that little bit of extra heavy whipping cream in my coffee because it's so good. Well, the scale went up. So I completely agree with you there. But is there a place in all of the coaching that you do and all the people that you've trained and coached, is there a place where you say, maybe for you, we got to pull back on those carbs, focus on protein because that produces more thermogenesis and kind of balance out the fat, but maybe we do pull back on the carbs a little bit?
Well, I mean, we pull back on carbs just to create a calorie deficit because we'll pull back on fats as well. The way we do things and the way our app does things is we start with protein always. So we're always focusing on protein because like you said, protein is thermogenic. It's more satiating calorie per calorie. It also has effects on lean body mass sparing. So we always start with protein. So if you're going to eat a high protein diet, but you're going to create a calorie deficit, you have to get the calorie deficit from somewhere. You can get it from fats, you can get it from carbohydrate, or you can get it from a little bit of both. So typically we'll start our clients and, high protein or high. For our competitors or those who are in the fitness industry, we usually try to get them to calm down on the protein because we have people who are, eating 250 to 300 grams of protein a day, whereas your average person, looks at over 100 grams of protein and says, how the hell am I supposed to eat that?
Right.
So for our average person, we'll try to get them to pump up their protein to pretty much what they'll tolerate and be consistent with. And then we'll look at the remaining calories because again, let's say we're putting somebody on a 1,500 calorie diet or 1,600 calorie diet, and we're going to get 150 grams of protein. Well, that's 600 calories gone. So now we've got 1,000 calories left over. Well, where are we going to distribute those? We can distribute them to carbohydrates and fats, right? So usually what we'll ask them is, hey, do you have a preference? Would you prefer to eat more savory foods? Would you prefer more, sweeter foods? Do you prefer a mix of both? What is your preference? And then we'll distribute based on that. So certainly part of a calorie deficit, we're going to restrict carbohydrate just by default because we don't want dietary fat to be too low because there's problems with, very low fat diets. And by the same token, we're typically also restricting dietary fat as well. But how much we're restricting just depends on the person, their daily energy expenditure, and what their targets are.
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned protein because I'm the same as you. Let's do protein first. Yep. And I think that you go by the 1 gram per pound of lean body mass, but I've also heard you cite some studies that show that it's even safe to go up to 4 grams per pound of lean body mass, which I think would be way too much. What's that?
Per kilogram.
Per kilogram. Oh, that changes it. Okay. That changes it. So what is your protein recommendation?
4 grams per pound would be intense.
I was going to say that would be up in the 200, 400. Oh my God, way too much. So what do you guys normally do with your normal average everyday clients and then your competitors? Because even my average everyday clients, like you said, the women, they can barely get in 50, 60 grams. They think that's a lot.
Yeah, so usually we're targeting at least 1.6 grams per kilogram of lean mass. And then, if people can go up to 2.4 grams per kilogram of lean mass, we'll try to go there. For competitors, it's probably more like 2 to 3 grams per kilogram of lean mass, just because we are trying to leverage that satiety and thermogenesis as much as possible. But yeah, I mean, obviously for some people, that's a really high amount of protein, even at 1.6 grams per kilogram of lean mass. Or, you know, some people say, well, I don't know how to get my lean mass. Well, then do it based on your goal body weight, right? And the reason we do it that way is simply because if you were somebody who's obese, you know, and you're, you know, 150 kilos, you don't need 400 grams of protein. Like that's just overkill, right? So if you're doing it based off your ideal weight or your goal weight, it's going to be much more reflective of your actual protein requirements, because protein requirements are almost exclusively based on lean body mass.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you see, this is why I love you. Your brain is just insane. It just is. I mean,
There's a lot of stuff rattling around there.
You have like an encyclopedia of studies in there that you can just pull from. It's just amazing. It just amazes me.
Actually, somebody said that I was like a computer the other day. It was funny.
Yeah.
But only when it comes to this stuff. God forbid you ask me to change a tire. I'll be shit out of luck.
That's right. We all have our skills. It's totally fine.
Yeah, I always joke that if I had to learn something else, it's just going to start spitting out math or something, you know?
Yeah, pretty much. I can see that. I can see that happening. All right. I'm going to keep picking that brain too, because I love talking about, I love bringing experts on and having them speak from their place of genius and having it possibly back or negate, but possibly back something that I've been saying. And I think it helps with my patients, my listeners, when they hear me say something, to hear you say it as well, then they go, okay, so now two people are saying it. So
Sure.
I love having this. I just love having this discussion. So we talked about protein, and I want to tie that into this OMAD phase. Oh my God, it drives me absolutely crazy. So here we are trying to get people to eat more protein, especially women, because we know that they think that one chicken breast per day is the amount of protein. They think peanut butter is a source of protein. So then we have everybody jumping into one meal a day, you know, doing these extended fasts, one meal a day. There is no way in hell that you're going to get in the amount of protein in one meal, nor do I even believe that the body could handle. If I ate 120 grams of protein, my body's not handling. If I ate 100 grams of protein, my body's not handling it in one meal. So can you please expand and give your thoughts on this OMAD fad that is out there?
Yeah, so I mean, your body, you know, I'm probably a little bit pedantic in terms of like terminology. But a lot of people say, well, you can only absorb a certain amount of protein. No, you'll absorb all of it. But what it gets used for is quite a different story. So if we talk about like what's useful for, you know, lean mass gain or, you know, those sorts of things, or muscle building, you know, the issue is you don't really, like with dietary fat, you kind of have unlimited storage in adipose. Carbohydrate, you still have a decent amount of storage with your liver and muscle glycogen, you know, somewhere around 400 to 500 grams. But with dietary protein, I mean, other than a really small amino acid pool, I mean, I'm talking very small, your body doesn't really have a storage form of protein. And some people say, well, sure it does. Your lean mass is a storage form of protein. That's like saying my house is a storage form of wood. Yeah, you could get wood out of it, but that's not why you built the house.
Right.
So because of that, and because we know there is an anabolic cap per meal where just pushing in more protein does not further enhance muscle protein synthesis. And this is really my wheelhouse. That thesis sitting right back there is about muscle protein synthesis.
Nice.
So, you know, anywhere from like 20 to 40 grams of protein, depending on the individual's lean mass, depending on the quality of this protein source, anywhere from 20 to 40 grams usually maximizes that response. If you talk about lower quality sources like plant proteins, you know, you're going to be up around that 40 gram. Talk about higher quality sources like you know, whey protein, you're going to be close to that 20 grams. Now, obviously, if you're talking about, you know, somebody who's 50 kilos of lean mass versus somebody who's 100 kilos of lean mass, yes, it's going to change things. But in general, 20 to 40 grams kind of encapsulates that. So if you're only doing that once, you're only getting that one increase in muscle protein synthesis. And that increase, at least based on our data and the data I published, is only about 3 hours long. So if you're only having that one spike per day, you're not really optimizing your, or you're not really leveraging your maximal, response for muscle anabolism. Now, I will say, if your goal is to be the most muscular human you can be, then you want to have multiple doses, obviously, 4 to 5 per day. Now, you can certainly overdo it. There's also research that kind of indicates that if you do too frequent of feedings, you kind of desensitize the muscle to that effect. It's called the muscle full effect or the refractory effect. We also documented that in one of our studies. And but if you do it too infrequently, obviously you aren't hitting it enough. So what I'll say about fasting or OMAD or any of these kind of time restricted feeding sort of things is they're not magic. They have not been shown to be superior when you equate weekly calories to a daily calorie restriction. Now, if they help you, some people say, you know what, if I do that during my fasting period, I don't really get hungry, so it just helps me reduce my calories. Great, awesome. And if your goal is not be the, you're not worried about being, the most muscular person you can be, then maybe it's a great tool. But there's nothing magical about it. And the other thing I've heard is, well, I'm fasting for longevity. There is no human evidence that fasting is superior for longevity compared to just normal calorie restriction. Now, do I think that it could be useful? Yeah, it's a useful tool for some people. But there was actually just a study published just this last couple months ago that looked at a cohort of people comparing 1 meal a day versus 3 meals a day, and actually showed that the people eating 1 meal per day had a 40% greater risk of mortality, 30% greater risk of mortality compared to people eating 3 meals a day, and a 80% greater risk of cardiovascular mortality compared to people eating 3 meals a day. Now, that being said, there could be a bias there in terms of people who are eating 3 meals a day may just have other lifestyle habits that are healthier. But they did look at BMI between the groups. The BMIs weren't different, so there wasn't a difference in fat mass likely. So what I would say is I'm not ready to say that 1 meal a day is going to kill you early.
Right.
But it certainly doesn't seem to keep you alive longer. So, if you're doing, I always say when people say they're doing fasting, I say, why are you doing it? So, well, I don't feel hungry. It helps me limit my calories. Bravo. Great. Awesome. Go for it. But if it's, I'm going to live, as long as I can, the data is pretty underwhelming on that, despite what social media hypesters will tell you.
And then there's the stressor too. I mean, I know some hormetic stress is good for the body, but when I would, when the whole fasting craze first came out, of course, you try it on yourself, experiment, and I would be gritting my teeth trying to make it till, because I had it set, right? Type A, 2 p.m. is when I'm going to have my first meal. That's it. And it didn't matter. I wasn't listening to my own hunger signals. So then that created a stressor on the body, increased my cortisol, increased my blood glucose. I was kind of just defeating the entire purpose of the fast because I was grinning and bearing it through the whole fast period that I was trying to reach. So there's that aspect of it too.
Well, I think for a lot of people, they use fasting as kind of a way to justify basically like binge eating later, right? And instead of, focusing on, whole food, minimally processed, stuff, they're, downing cookies and ice cream because it's in my feeding period,
Right.
And it's like, well, you kind of defeating the purpose of this, just like, vegans who are doing, plant-based for health, but then they're eating, vegan mac and cheese and vegan chicken wings and all this kind of stuff. And keto people who are doing, keto, but they're doing keto ice cream, which by the way, has more calories than the regular stuff. You're better off just eating the regular stuff. So there's a right way to do these diets and a wrong way to do these diets. And again, it's important to understand why they all work. They all work. If they work because they put you in a calorie deficit, not because there's some kind of magic associated with it.
Right. Exactly. Now, were we doing it wrong back in the day? Well, now I don't know how old you are, but back in my day of bodybuilding, it was the 6 meals a day. So were we doing anything wrong back then, or were we kind of on point?
So I'm 41. I was born in 1981. So I got into bodybuilding circa like the year 2000.
Same.
And
Yep.
so, that's when you ate 8 meals a day and,
Yep.
and boost your metabolism and that sort of thing. I mean, we were wrong about that, but do I think 6 meals a day is a bad thing? I think it's kind of overkill, and it can be a little bit restrictive for your lifestyle because, it's like when I was in college, I couldn't go anywhere without putting a protein bar in my pocket, or in my case, I'd, cook up some chicken breast, put it in a Ziploc bag and stuff it in my cargo shorts. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I'll never forget I was on a plane and I pulled a chicken breast out of my pocket. My grandfather was with me, and he was just mind blown that I took a chicken breast on a plane,
Out of your
like,
pocket.
oh, gotta get that, amino acid IV drip,
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I think it's overkill. I think, 3 to 5 high quality protein meals per day. If you're hitting your overall protein target, I think that's the most important thing. And I think that there's many different ways to skin a cat. And I think where most of the debates are in the margins, like I tell people, like when it comes to nutrition and training, I'm like, you're worried about like meal timing and like the type of carbohydrate, and you're not even consistent with your diet. Like you're literally stepping over $100 bills to pick up pennies, or they're like, well, should I do leg press or hack squat or this? I'm like, should I do 10 reps or 5 reps? And I'm like, you don't even train hard. Like you're worried about your rep range, and like I've watched you don't even train hard. Like, because people, I have this sometimes. I'm going to post on this. Like, you cannot out science hard fucking training. So people will send me like some IFBB pro, and they'll be like, look at him, Layne. You say do full range of motion, and he's doing partial range of motion. Look how big he is. And I'm like, he trains hard. Like it makes up for a lot, and he's done it for 20 years. So yeah, it may still not be optimal, but if you just train really freaking hard for a really long period of time, you'll grow some muscle,
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people miss that, and they get really hung up on dumb stuff that's like less than 1% of what actually makes gains. And I tell people now, I'm like, when it comes to diet or training, mindset is way more important than any of these X's and O's stuff that we debate over.
Well, expand on that a little bit, because I want to go into the lifting heavy shit philosophy. It's what I tell my women to do, because all these women are scared about getting big and bulky. So we can break that down. But what do you mean about mindset?
Yeah, so let me just take that from the top. That's like saying, I don't want to climb in my car because I'm afraid I'll be a NASCAR driver. Don't worry, you won't. I've spent my entire fucking adult life trying to get too big, and now I just basically look like an athletic guy in a shirt, okay? So you're not going to get too big. I've come across maybe a handful of females who grew enough muscle that they were like, whoa, I kind of want to back off, Yeah, so I think this idea of like worrying about being too big, unless you get on anabolic steroids, you're going to be fine, okay?
Right.
And by the way, if you get to the point where you're happy with your muscle mass, just don't train as hard.
Right.
Easy peasy. That's like, if you're in a NASCAR and you're worried about going too fast, just don't press the pedal down so far.
Right. Exactly.
So, there's that. But the real problem is most people, and we actually have scientific data to validate this, most people don't know how to train hard. They don't know how to push themselves. They push themselves up to a certain level of discomfort and don't push through that. And that's one of the real, one of the things I have to caveat a lot is I'll tell people, you don't have to train to failure to get the most gains. The research shows very clearly you can train within a few reps of failure and still get equivalent gains, and probably not fatigue yourself as much and risk, impeding your recovery. The problem is if you've never trained to failure, you actually don't know what it's like.
Right.
And I'll give some examples. I mean, I've squatted like 480 pounds for 14 reps before. And when I finished with that was absolute failure, to the point where I actually couldn't re-rack it because I couldn't fully lock out my lower back. I'd have somebody come over and like help me.
Mm-hmm.
When I got done, I laid down on the ground. I didn't move for 20 minutes. I was like, my heart rate was over 200 beats per minute and I could not move. Okay. Yep. That's training to failure. This whole, most people like do a lift and then they go, well, that was hard. Okay, I was, close to failure. And I always tell people, when I'm 5 reps or 6 reps from failure, it feels hard. Okay. Yeah. Now, and if we look at the research data in intermediates and beginners, there was a recent study that looked at if they have participants self-select weights, what weights on average do they self-select? And it was about 50% of their 1 rep max. Now, if you're going to select 50% of your 1 rep max, you can still grow muscle, but you'd probably need to do like 20 to 30 reps to do it. Okay. And most people on average, they were getting like 10, 15 reps, something like that. So not even close to failure. If you're not within 5 reps of failure, you're really not touching that optimal level of, activating muscle fibers. So there was another study that also had participants rate their RPE. Now, when I say RPE is a scale of 10 when it comes to resistance training. Now, an RPE of 10 means you could not have done another rep. Okay. RPE of 9 means you could have done 1 more rep. 2, you could have done 2 more reps, and so on and so forth. Or sorry, RPE of 8 would have been you could have done 2 more reps. RPE of 7, you could have done 3 more reps, and so on and so forth. The problem is, if you never trained to failure, you probably don't know how to estimate that very well. So they had participants rate their within set. So while they're training, they'd have them do a few reps. How hard was that? RPE 8, whatever. And then they actually basically they turned up like heavy metal music and were like yelling at the participants and like getting them to go to absolute failure. They overestimated their RPE on average by 5. So meaning if they said, oh, that's an RPE of 9, they got like 6 more reps after that. Mm-hmm. So most people don't know where their failure point is. If they've never pushed themselves to that, they don't understand it. And I get accused of performance enhancing drugs all the time. And I'll tell people, and I don't have a problem saying this, you go in the gym, I'm the hardest training person in the gym. And it's not close. Like that's not me being cocky. It's just true.
Just is,
and
yeah.
Like I've had people I train sometimes in a crunch around here, and I'll literally have somebody every week come up and say, you train so fucking hard. And I'm like, yeah, and that's still like RPE 7 or 8, right? So now imagine doing that for 23 years, 24 years consistently. The longest I've ever taken off was after world championships this past year. I took 8 days off. That's the longest I've ever taken off in 24 years. So imagine if you applied yourself to something for 24 years, consistently training really, really hard. I think you'd be impressed with what you can accomplish.
I would agree. And there is something to that, yelling at you with heavy metal. I mean, we did that for powerlifting to get to your next PR, it's like,
there's research data to show that music is a performance enhancer. So there's research data to show that music will give about a 10% performance boost. So will other people yelling at you. So actually having the opposite sex in the same room boost performance in research studies. So that's why, I'm not too ashamed to admit I go to a gym because I like to have an atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly. It does. It does just push you. I mean, we've all done the COVID garage training, but yes, I mean, gains and overall physiques are much better now that we're back in the gym. They just are. Yeah. So what about menopausal women? Because I have a large group of menopausal listeners, and there's been a lot of, I don't know what you want to call them, celebrity trainers or whatever, that will tout their programs to train based on your cycle or train differently if you're a menopausal woman than if you're not a menopausal woman. What is your take on that?
There's not really much data to back it up. There's a lot of theoretical stuff. What I will say is it's probably a good idea to auto-regulate your training in general. So, I mean, I've had women who are clients, they'll say, I'm on my period this week, should I go lighter? And I'll say, well, if you go in and you feel like crap and you're performing terribly in your warm-ups, then go lighter. But I've also had women hit PRs during their cycle. So I'm much more of a fan of just like not pre-planning it and just simply taking it as it comes. And yeah, if you feel terrible, just go in and just go through the motions. That's fine. Like, that's fine to, do a taper or reduce your intensity, auto-regulate. It's been shown repeatedly that auto-regulation is probably the way to go. But do you need to plan that? I don't think so. And when you look at the research data, this idea that people who are menopausal or postmenopausal or premenopausal need to train differently, there's just no solid data to support that. I think I'm probably gonna get in trouble for this, but I think every single person wants to feel like there's some kind of unique unicorn. And so like have some special training program.
Right.
And the reality is that what works tends to work across the board. But that being said, again, that doesn't mean you can't auto-regulate. And if you are feeling, like somebody asked me this, they're like, oh, I track my HRV and I track my recovery on my Oura ring or whatever it is. Well, you can actually have what's called a nocebo effect, which is your watch tells you slept terribly or you're under recovered. And so you get to the gym and you go, oh yeah, I do feel bad. Whereas if you've never seen that, you wouldn't have that response. So what I'll tell people is, I'm not saying that stuff can't be useful, but really you should auto-regulate based on how you're feeling when you actually get to the gym and warm up. So I actually use, I'm a super nerd. So I actually use as powerlifting, I'll use a bar velocity device. So basically it tells me how fast my bar speed is. And I know based on my warm-ups what my bar speed should be at those different warm-up weights. And so if I get in the gym and I'm feeling like crap, I slept like crap the night before and my bar speed's slower, then yeah, I'm gonna back off the weight. But if I, maybe didn't sleep well, but I'm warming up and I feel okay and my bar speed's there, why would I go lighter? Like regardless, isn't the most important thing your actual performance rather than all these surrogate measures? So I think we get too caught up in trying to predict things and we should just take things as they come.
Yeah. No, that's why I don't have an Oura ring, because I could see myself getting caught up in that nocebo effect, especially with sleep. Oh my God, I didn't sleep. Oh, okay. Now I'm going to be hungrier today and I'm going to feel like shit today. And no, I won't do it. I won't do it. And the first time I saw one of those, what do you call it? The velocity, it was at the Philadelphia Eagles training facility where the dudes train. Oh my God, these machines were amazing. Like they would tell the guys, are you strong today or are you not? Like, how did you compare to the last workout? And what should you go up in? And so it had nothing to do even with how you felt. Like you might come in, like you said, feeling like shit, but you pull a PR and there's the data right there telling you. It's amazing.
My best all-time squat set for like around 10 reps, I didn't get 10, I got 9 reps, was 530, I think it was 530 pounds. I did 9 reps. And that was after a night where I traveled the day before and literally did not sleep the night before that. And I went to the gym and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take what's there today. And I had like a certain weight on the sheet. And I was like, okay, well, we'll see what's there. I did all my sets. And I'm like, I had what's called an AMRAP program, which is basically as many reps as possible for my last set. And even though I felt tired, I felt shaky, you know how you feel when you're like a little bit sleep deprived, I was moving the weight well. And I was like, well, I guess we're doing this AMRAP, and I got 9 reps. So there you go. Again, I'm not saying that like, that's what would usually happen. Usually I'd probably perform a little bit worse, but for whatever reason, recovery isn't just sleep. It's hundreds of different factors all coming together at once. So like I said, I'm more of a fan of just seeing what your performance is on that day and auto-regulating based on that.
Yep, definitely. Thank you for all that, because everybody needs to hear this message, like mass messaging of this. Just lift heavy shit and don't get caught up in all the devices, because there's just too many of them. However
hard you think you're going, you can go harder. I promise you.
I'm going to take that into the gym tomorrow too. I'm going to take this message with me, and I'm going to, because you're right. There are times where you're just like, you're going through the motions, but it's just, don't waste that time. If you made it there, if you made it to the gym, then get the most out of it. Don't be talking, don't be on your phone. Just go get the best workout that you can, because you blocked out that time and your body made it there. So that's step one.
Well, and also like, don't just do the same thing every time. Like I see so many people just come in the gym like, well, I guess I'll slap a plate on the side of the barbell and do this many reps.
Right.
If you keep doing the same thing, your body has no impetus to change. Okay. This goes for anything in life. If you want to create change, My coach, Zach Robinson for powerlifting, he said it very well. Adaptation is not comfortable. So if you want to force your body to adapt, you have to get uncomfortable.
We can apply that to pretty much every area of life.
Everything.
That one quote.
Absolutely.
Seriously. All right, Layne, we're going to end on poop.
Nice.
So because that's a perfect place to end, right? So I'm going to tell you this.
Well, it's usually where I start my day, but still,
But yeah, after a good cup of coffee, but right.
Yes.
But no, one thing that I say, and this is going to tie into the gut too. And I think, what's your mug? Nice. Yes. Drinking the tears of my haters is what it says. So
I also have one that says, coffee makes me poop. So I've got some really entertaining.
And it just does.
Yeah, for about 50% of people. Some people don't get that response, but for about, they actually don't know what does it either. They're not quite sure what component of coffee causes that. But
I just figured it was the stimulant effects, but you know more than me. I don't know. Yeah.
There's a few different theories here.
But now I want to tie it into the gut too, because one thing that I always say, and I say this over and over again, and it drives me crazy. These functional integrative practitioners out there, health coaches, whatever, saying, if we just heal your gut, we are going to heal your thyroid. We're going to fix every disease you possibly can imagine going on in your body, because the gut, it all starts in the gut. Your immunity starts in the gut. Every disease in the world starts in the gut. What is your take? I think I know your take on it, but I'm going to let you take this.
So yes, there is evidence that the gut and gut health has tie-ins, all across the body in different diseases. However, we are such in an infancy of understanding the gut microbiome. Anyone who's making hard recommendations other than the following: consume sufficient amount of prebiotic fibers, exercise, don't eat too much, and limit your saturated fat. Anybody making recommendations other than those four is talking out of their ass, because we really don't know much else. So we do know if you exercise. So first off, we've only correlated a lot of stuff. So reverse causality can always be true. So people say, well, you got to heal your gut so you can do X. Well, maybe X is actually what heals your gut. Okay. Right. So like exercise, we know that people who exercise a lot have a different gut microflora on average than people who don't. Now, does that mean people with, a certain gut microflora are better at exercise, or does it mean gut exercise changes your gut microbiome? We know that people who are obese have low amounts of certain bacteria and high amounts of others that lean people don't. Now, did they become obese because they lack those, or did obesity change their gut microbiome? We don't know the answers to those questions. So gut healing, or just gut in general, has now become what inflammation was 10 years ago, which, everything's about inflammation, and you got to heal the inflammation first before. And most of these jokers don't even know what inflammation is, because they're like, oh, well, yeah, my knees feel better. That is not the same inflammation that you're referring to. When people talk about inflammation, I'll say, okay, so you had your CRP and your IL-6 done, and they'll just look at me with very blank stares of, what are those? Well, those are your inflammatory markers. Right. So yeah, I think gut health has been used kind of ubiquitously by charlatans to sell people protocols they don't need. Here's what we know is healthy for your gut: exercise, don't eat too much, consume enough fiber, and probably limit your saturated fat. And the reason for the saturated fat is not necessarily the saturated fat itself, but saturated fat tends to generate more bile, and the bile end products of saturated fat appears to be somewhat negative for certain beneficial species of bacteria. Now, dietary fiber, we know, increases gut microdiversity and is the main fuel for the gut microbiome. So it's so funny, and again, it just shows people will draw the wrong conclusion. Say, well, when I eat plants or fiber, I get really gassy and bloated. It's obviously bad for my gut microbiome. What do you think the gut microbiome does? It produces short chain fatty acids from dietary fiber. That is literally what they run on. When you're gassy, that typically means your gut is actually pretty happy in terms of your gut microbiome. You may feel uncomfortable physically, but those are the main fuels for those gut microbiota. So I think people have equated, like, you know, whether or not they have like some kind of GI distress with a healthy gut microbiome.
Right.
And those two things should not necessarily be connected. So anyways, I think, you know, the protocol for healing your gut: don't eat too much, exercise, eat enough dietary fiber with a good amount of soluble fiber, and don't eat too much saturated fat. And those are your gut hacks.
And please notice that he did not say eat Activia yogurt and take a probiotic every day.
Yeah, the data on probiotics is pretty underwhelming. So I have one of my former lab mates. So she was doing her master's while I was doing my PhD at the University of Illinois. We were both in the same lab under Dr. Don Layman. Her name is Dr. Suzanne Devkota, and she is one of the foremost experts in the gut microbiome in the world. And what she's told me and what the research shows is that these probiotics simply don't have. So let me first define the difference. Probiotics are active live microbiota that you take. Okay. I think you need something like on the order of trillions in order to colonize the gut. And these things are on the order of like millions.
Yep.
So you're like, you just don't get enough in order to actually change the colonization of your gut. Now, prebiotic fibers as fuel can change the colonization of your gut because they are fuels. Now, the other thing is, in the studies where they've given enough microbiota to actually cause colonization, if you're not giving enough prebiotic fibers for those particular microbiota, then they actually go away anyway. You just go back to your normal amount, your normal gut microflora. So even if you were to take a probiotic that did colonize, which is unlikely, it's just going to go away if you don't fuel it properly with enough dietary fiber.
And I have said that over and over again. The highest probiotic that I've seen is like 250 million or billion, even 250 billion. And there are trillions. So you still have orders billions and trillions of guys in your gut not getting fed by that probiotic that you're pumping every day.
Right.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Thank you for touching on that, because we just had to. We just had to. And so, okay, last question. There is a last question, because I have heard you say this, and I'm so happy again that you said this out loud, that you don't have to poop after every meal. So we're going to end on pooping after every meal. That's what we're ending on.
Yeah. You know, everybody's like fecal movements, bowel movements are different. I'm somebody who is pretty frequent, but I also eat like 50, 60 grams of fiber a day and a high amount of calories overall. So I'm just going to have more bowel movements than somebody eating 1,500 calories and 20 grams of fiber a day.
Right.
But, you know, if you were somebody who needs to, I mean, like, this can be a very boring recommendation, but fiber is one of the fiber and drinking enough water. Because if you just increase your fiber intake, but don't increase your water, it can actually cause constipation, because the way fiber works is by adding bulk to stool, and about 75% of that bulk is actually water. So I do recommend increasing fiber intake, but that needs to also correspond with enough water. But if you're pooping regularly once a day, you're probably fine.
That's a win. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a win. Well, Layne, thank you so much for just coming on here, imparting your wisdom. You're the thesaurus of a brain. I mean, I love it. I love it. I love everything. So what do you have going on right now? I know we talked about the Carbon app, because I'm a huge, huge proponent of it. But what else is going on? Where can people find you, and where can they kind of just connect and get your services?
Yeah, so I'm BioLayne on all social media, and my main hub website is biolayne.com, and you can find everything we sell and offer on biolayne.com. I have a monthly research review, so if you enjoy me talking about studies, we have a research review called Reps, where every month we break down 5 studies that are relevant to nutrition and exercise and supplementation. And I break them down like very little jargon, you know, just a way that the average person can understand, and like give you like basically how you can apply it to yourself as well. We also have the workout builder on our website, which is basically like customizable training templates for people who need help with resistance training. We also offer one-on-one coaching if you need more support through our coaching team, Team BioLayne. We serviced over 1,000 clients last year and had rave reviews. I can't remember the last time we got a negative piece of feedback. These are all like really expert coaches who deeply care about their clients. They do a great job. I've got my supplement line, Outwork Nutrition. So if you're looking for evidence-based performance supplements, Outwork Nutrition is great. And then I have some short courses available right now, but later this year, I'm going to be launching something called Physique Coaching Academy. So if you're somebody who's looking to become like a coach who helps people lose fat, build muscle, this is going to be the go-to certification for that. I'm building it alongside Professor Bill Campbell from USF. And Bill Campbell's lab is called the Female Physique Enhancement Lab. So he basically focuses on physique enhancement, especially looking at females. It's the only lab in the country that really focuses on that. And I've seen his sections of Physique Coaching Academy, and it's going to blow people's minds. So if you're somebody who unfortunately right now, if you want to, you have personal training certifications that don't really cover nutrition, and you have nutrition certifications that cover nutrition, but a lot of extra stuff that you don't really need if you're looking to train people for fat loss and muscle building. So we kind of combine those things together and basically give you what you do need with nothing you don't. And we're looking at it being basically the equivalent of like an associate's degree is what we want. So that's going to be coming soon, and we're very excited about that.
That is awesome. That is so needed. And especially because I think in this world, people see women as little men, and to have that women's physique expert, like you said, really dialing it in for oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's amazing. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're very excited.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Layne. Thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward I'm going to join the research group because I love how you break down the study. So
awesome. Yeah, it's a great product.
Cool. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.